Texas, a large state with deserts, pine forests, and rivers that form the border with Mexico. There's many areas that are wide, open, and desolate. What if you saw something dark in the landscape? Grab a blanket, turn off your lights, and let's listen to 3 ghost stories from Texas. A different glimpse at the world. I was very young, only about 10 years old when I began to need glasses. I wore them full time, although the doctor told me not to do so because it would make the disease get worse. I'm glad I paid no attention to her words. The first time something eerie happened was while I was playing with my friend on her front yard. We sat on a bench, looking around the street. I noticed my glasses were dirty, so I removed and wiped them. I looked to the side, facing a house, when all of a sudden, I saw a white, fog-like figure, shaped much like a human, crossing the street, coming towards us. Now you might think it's normal, just my eyes playing tricks on me because I'm used to wearing the glasses all the time. But it was obvious it was something else. And like I said, I don't need much focus. I slipped my glasses back on, at first thinking it was just my eyes. But right when I placed them back on, the figure was gone. I urged for my friend to follow me inside, and once there, I told her what had happened. Just a few weeks later, my younger sister began telling me she had horrible nightmares where a dark figure covered her and wouldn't let her wake up. Normally, I wouldn't believe a word of what she said, but I figured that it could be true. After all, I do recall some nights where she would cry and complain in her sleep. A few nights after she told me of her nightmares, her nights of crying in her sleep were back. I woke up quietly. Being a light sleeper, slowly and cautiously, I reached for the light switch, flipped it on, and turned my attention to my sister. She was swaying and complaining, yet her eyes were closed in a deep sleep. I looked up, and to my surprise saw the same figure that scared my sister. It was moving from bedpost to bedpost, then stopped and looked down at my sister. I was so startled I screamed, waking up my sister, who sat up alarmed and looked around, clearly confused. I proceeded to tell her everything, thinking that maybe glasses do block my sixth sense. Aimless drive. My friends and I had made a plan to go to Possum Kingdom Lake State Park recently. It's a state park that is 2 hours away. It was a fun drive out, but the place wasn't all that great. In fact, it was fairly boring and buggy. Instead of trying to make it work there, we decided to go driving. We visited Breckenridge, Vernon, Burg Burnett, Waurika, and Ardmore. Basically, we went west, then north, hit Oklahoma for a couple hours, and then went home. On the drive out to Possum Kingdom, we listened to songs that we could get off the internet. At a certain point, we lost service and had to switch to the actual radio. We listened to the radio stations we already knew most of the day, but when we were heading north, we had to find new ones. We eventually settled on the station called The Bear. It was playing 80s and 90s music, mostly 90s. Occasionally, the DJ would tell us the weather. We were being followed by the bad weather all day, and we thought it was pretty funny. We liked the station though. The guy had an awesome voice. We thought his way of speaking was interesting and kind of funny. And we knew that we would continue to have it for a while, because it seemed like they were based on the border of Texas and Oklahoma. We settled into the station, and the music, while we were talking, joking, and all but swooning over anything remotely cute or pretty. The station had become part of the car's atmosphere. We had just been listening to it for that long. At a certain point, we all quieted as we were looking something over the prairie land, drawing ever closer to the border of Texas. The skyway behind us was dark, but it hadn't yet made a flash with lightning. We were just admiring the view and enjoying the fact that we were out in the middle of nowhere. That's when the radio crackled out, and a female voice said either, "You don't have to lock the doors," or "You never have to lock the doors." We all caught it, confirmed it with each other. It was weird, primarily because the bear was in mid-sentence. This other voice came out and it was right back to the bear. We were real willing to write it off as a station cutting through though. I thought we would have to change it soon, but we didn't. We stayed on course for a long time. The radio didn't crackle again until we were much closer to Ardmore. We have used the ghost box before, and the voice seemed a lot like that. It was crackled and swift. The lady spoke clearly, but she didn't sound like she was acting. It didn't sound like a commercial. I don't know why anything would tell us we didn't have to lock the door, but I can't shake the feeling that it was abnormal. Also, at the end of our trip, my best friend and I went into the restroom together. She said her neck was hurting and asked me to look at it. She had a really jagged and large scratch down her neck. She told me she had no idea where she could have gotten it from. We were in the car pretty much all day. Whether the scratch and the voice were related or not, it seemed pretty odd. We all heard it. We've played with a ghost box before and it seemed a bit like that. It had the same sound, and that's the first time I've ever heard a radio break like that in all my years of road trips. I know it's a small experience, but for some reason, it feels significant. A haunting in the Wild West. Texas is a big place. I don't have to tell you this. Everybody knows the history of the state. It's also famous for huge cowboy hats, spurs, and longhorn steer. Some of the best chili I've ever tasted came from folk who wear western wear and cowboy boots. I grew up with country music, and my dad was great at singing along to the radio. To this day, I cannot listen to country. It has little to do with the music itself, but some of the haunted history I have been privy to experience. One of the strangest haunted places in the world exists within the confines of a small barn. Yes, you read it right. It was about as in the middle of nowhere as you can get. Our family owned the farm, but it had been abandoned years before. Today, it had become a big bowl of dust of open fields and dissipated houses. Around at the other end of the property stood a small barn. At one time, it held 5 cows, 3 horses, and of course, a few chickens wandered about. But it was the other resident, the unseen one, that caused me pain. This little barn in the middle of nowhere held a ghost boy who called himself Nobody. It was about the saddest thing I'd ever heard. Nobody was around 11 years old, and his dirt-covered overalls and his face told a story of poverty and neglect. This is his story, the version he could remember. "I'm about 11, ma'am, and my ma, she ain't a-living no more," he said. His eyes looked to be dark brown, and he had the longest lashes I'd ever seen. Behind the dirt of his face, I could see he had an angelic face, almost pretty, if you could imagine that. He was small for his age, and he squirmed in place. He would glance at me, and then look down at his bare feet. He kept his hands hidden in his pockets, and I decided to ask him why. "Honey, why don't you take your hands out of your pockets?" I asked. "This here's why, ma'am." He pulled his hands out of his filthy pockets, as though it pained him to do so. I nearly fainted from the sight. The spectral boy had burns covering both his hands. Sometimes, the dead stick to their last memories before death, and this was a bad memory. I took a step closer to him and could tell He had probably died of infection. He held up his hands so I could take a good look. My stomach churned, but I tried to maintain a calm exterior. I smiled at him and examined his burns. This child had suffered in life. My heart was aching to hold him, but in his ethereal body it was impossible. I said in quiet prayer for God to send me the right words. I knew that the person responsible for this was probably punished in death, severely punished, I hope. His hands were raw and transparent. I had never seen hands swollen to twice the size as they were. They were lobster red in places, and black and green had set in around his joints and fingers. He tried to show me he could still move his fingers. But they weren't getting no better, he whispered. I asked him why he was in the barn, and he pointed to a place under some rotting boards. Tony put nobody away in there, Mom. And he lowered his eyes to the ground. My heart was breaking into pieces. The tears were sitting on the edge of my emotions, and I didn't want him to get scared or disappear. I asked him to sit on the ground with me, and we huddled in that dirty, dank place. I explained to him that his mama was waiting for him, and all he had to do was call out to her with all of his heart. He looked into my eyes and saw the truth there. The boy scrambled to his feet and looked all around the barn. I told him she wasn't inside and to go outside, she would be waiting. I had to pull myself together as the tears were threatening to overfill my eyes. I could barely see, and I was grateful at the shadows of the barn interior. Nobody ran to the barn door. He was hesitant to go through, but thought the better of it. And he was gone. I got up and pulled open the barn door. I could see him in the distance. He was running at full speed towards a woman in the field. She had her arms thrown wide open, and she caught the boy in her arms. This was a homecoming like never before, a child reunited with his mother. They slowly faded away, both of them in an embrace. I will always cherish witnessing this gift of love. Nobody was buried in a proper gravesite, with blessings and love. I had the name Christian engraved on a headstone. He was a little boy who deserved to have a real name. Afterwards, I did a little research. There was no record of any boy who died on the property. At least I had some peace, knowing he was with his beloved mother again. But I will always wonder about him. How did a child go through 11 years of life, known as nobody? It will always break my heart.